Hi, everybody. It's your life science/biology teacher, Mr. Poser, and we are back in our Unit 9, back in the next topic, which is patterns of evolution. In the last video, we talked about population genetics, including allele frequencies, what those are, what those mean, what does it mean when they change, and perhaps even the reasons why they change, the 5 different reasons why they change. That's where we just left off. This is where we're picking up on the patterns of evolution here. So what are the ways, or what are the patterns in which species evolve, and what are the patterns of natural selection? And here's the question that I'm going to ask you to start this topic off with. How closely related do you think sharks and dolphins are? Because they look pretty similar, right? They both have a streamlined body. They both have grayish skin with a white kind of underbelly. They both have these pointed snouts and same patterns of fins, mostly-ish. So they must be pretty closely related, right? But, we're going to find something that they might not be. So how did they evolve to look so similar to one another? Okay, and how we're going to start looking into patterns of evolution is by first looking into patterns of natural selection, or what we call the mechanisms of natural selection. Okay, so what we're going to focus on here is a population of starlings. And starlings are a really, really common bird in a lot of places in the world. They are invasive even, and they form these huge flocks that you might see in the sky every once in a while. You're driving down some kind of back road and you see a huge flock of birds. It's typically starlings. So wingspans of starlings, okay, so like from tip to tip of their wings, it's usually anywhere from 31 to 44 centimeters in length. And when you consider a ginormous population like this one, a ginormous flock of European starlings, what wingspan do you think most of the starlings have? Right, so the tiniest starlings have a wingspan of like 31 centimeters, and the biggest starlings have a wingspan of 44 centimeters. But where do you think most starlings are in terms of the length of their wingspan? Well, I'll tell you this much. We would probably expect the largest number of starlings to be right in the middle in terms of wingspan. Okay, we're expecting most of them to be right in the middle, right in what we call the mean or the average. Okay, if their wingspans can range from 31 to 44 centimeters, we're not expecting most of them to be at this 44 centimeter mark, or we're not expecting most of them to be at 31. So we're expecting a lot of these to be right in the middle, and that would be about 36 to 37 centimeters. Okay, and this distribution, or this frequencies and traits in organisms, they tend to follow a pattern called a normal distribution. And you may have heard of this in a math class or something before if you've ever taken statistics, or if you've ever talked about test scores. I'll come back to that in a second. You may have heard the words normal distribution, and that's the arrangement of data in which most of the values fall in the middle of the data set, which is represented by the mean. All right, so yes, we are getting into some graphs and into some data when we're talking about evolution today. And here's what a normal distribution kind of looks like. It's also known as a bell curve because it's shaped like a bell. Okay, so if you've ever considered test scores before, let's talk about SAT scores for a second here. I know it's that time of year. I mean, the national test date is coming up. Most people are going to fall right in the middle, right in the average of all of the different possible test scores. So you can get anywhere from, I think it's like a 400 to a 1600, right? A 1600 is perfect, and a 400 is like as low as you can get, right? We're going to expect very few test takers around the world to fall in that 400 to 500 range, but we're also expecting very, very few to fall in that 1500 to 1600 perfect score range. Okay, so there's going to be very, very few individuals on either end, but we can expect a lot, and this is what College Board and other test companies base their tests off of. What we're going to expect is a lot of individuals right smack dab in the middle, which will be around like 800 to 1200, right in that middle range. Most test takers are going to fall right in that middle, and that's what we call a normal distribution. All right, so if we come back to our starlings here, okay, most of the starlings that we're going to see are going to be right in the middle in terms of their wingspan. Okay, we have a range of what we call phenotypes here, and we can expect most of them to be at what we call the intermediate phenotype, meaning right in the middle. Okay, and this is another way that we can kind of make this graph. Okay, it's this graph is what we call a histogram. So it's kind of a combination of a bar graph and a line graph, right? So here, if we have like a few starlings on this end and more and more and more and more. We're going to find the highest number of starlings right smack dab in the middle, right by the mean. Okay? And this is a normal distribution. And just to reiterate here, I'm pointing out some terms here that I'm going to be using for the rest of the video talking about natural selection. Okay, so as I said before, most starlings have an average wingspan, or what we call the intermediate. Another term might be the mean, for right in the middle. The fewer starlings have shorter wings, is what we call a low extreme, and the fewer starlings are going to have longer wings, is what we call a high extreme. Right? So on the far left and the far right sides of our graphs, those are what we call the extremes. Okay? And in the middle is what we call the intermediate, or we can even call it the mean or the average. Okay? So we're going to be using these terms to talk about natural selection. So what does this have to do with natural selection? All right, so going back to the starlings here, using your knowledge of natural selection, what might happen if a new predator was introduced and starlings with larger wingspans can escape more easily? How would this affect the normal distribution, right? So think about this for a second. Here's our normal distribution, right? And there's a new predator in this area, and the ones with the larger wingspan can better escape because they could fly faster or something away from the predators. How would you expect natural selection? How would this population distribution change if the high extreme is providing an advantage for survival? Well, it might look something like this. We might expect a new normal distribution, except a little more skewed to the right towards having larger wings. Why? Because larger wings help them survive and reproduce. So as I said, starlings with larger wingspans would be selected for, starlings with smaller wingspans would be selected against, and over time the population would have a larger mean wingspan. Okay, so if this is our original population distribution, our new one might look over like this, might be shifted to the right a little bit. And this is a pattern of natural selection, or what we call a mechanism of natural selection called directional selection, because the mean moves in one direction. One extreme phenotype is selected over the other extreme phenotype, shifting the mean towards one of the extremes, which is kind of a mouthful, right? But all it's saying is that we're going to get a new average that's going to be shifted in one direction based on natural selection. Okay, so if our starlings with bigger wings are going to escape predators, we're going to probably see more starlings with bigger wings, right? Because that's how natural selection works. And we can see this graphically using that normal distribution. Okay. Another example that we've talked about before, and we've practiced with in my class at least, are the peppered moths. The peppered moths underwent directional selection in Industrial Revolution era England. So if you remember this, the colors of the trees were darker. So then the darker moths were selected for because they had a better survival advantage than the lighter moths. So over time, the population shifted from going from light to dark moths. Okay, it's the same kind of thing with the starlings. Okay, but that's not the only way that populations can evolve. Okay, so now imagine another scenario here where if you're right in the middle, okay, you're right in the middle in terms of wingspan, you're at that 36 or 37 centimeters, that's actually better for survival than anybody else. That's what we call stabilizing selection. So if the average wingspan turns out to be the most advantageous, that's stabilizing selection, where the intermediate phenotypes are selected over both of the extremes. So it's bad to have small wingspans and it's bad to have large wingspans. And it's good to be right in the middle. That's what we call stabilizing selection. And this is what that graph is going to look like, right? We're going to expect far more individuals right in the middle and far fewer individuals on either end if that type of natural selection is occurring. Okay? A real-world example of this is baby weight. It says humans have undergone stabilizing selection for birth weight. If you're too heavy as a baby coming out, that's complicated for mom and for you. And if you're too light or you're too small, that can cause health complications as well for you, and well, more for you, less for mom. But so over time, humans have undergone stabilizing selection in terms of their birth weight, because we want to be right in the middle. This is also what I call Goldilocks selection. Not too big, not too small, right? You want to be right in the middle for stabilizing selection. And we're going to see more individuals right in the middle as a result. Okay, and our third mechanism of natural selection is what we call disruptive selection. And it's almost the exact opposite of stabilizing selection. So think of another scenario here. Just pretend with me. Okay, if the large and the small wingspans provide more advantages than the average wingspan, that's what we call disruptive selection. Okay, so in this scenario, having big wings and having little wings provide their own separate advantages. And if you're right in the middle, you don't get either of those advantages. And this is what this graph is going to look like as a result. Both extreme phenotypes, meaning the far left and the far right of our graph, are going to be selected for, and the intermediate is selected against. And this is what our graph ends up looking like. The black line is the original, and the red line is the new population after natural selection has occurred. And this is what it's kind of going to look like, right? There's fewer individuals right in the middle because that's selected against. You want to have little wings or you want to have big wings if you're a starling in this scenario. Okay, a real-world example is another. I made the starlings one up, right? But the real-world example is a group of birds called the lazuli buntings. They've undergone disruptive selection. The bluest and the brownest feathers. This is actually sexual selection, not natural selection in this case, but still. Same principles apply. So the bluest and the brownest feathers are the most likely to find a mate, but not those in between, right? So if you're a male lazuli bunting, and you have really blue feathers, that's really good for you. Or if you have really brown feathers, that's also really good for you. But if you're somewhere in the middle, you have a mix of blue and brown, that's kind of bad for you, and that's what makes it disruptive selection. Okay. So let's see if you can figure these out. Well, it's already. Actually, just kidding. The answers are already there, right? So if we have some shells here, okay, and it's bad to be in this intermediate color, it's not going to help you survive and reproduce. That's disruptive selection. If a medium length tail is going to be advantageous for these lizards, that's going to be stabilizing selection because the short tail and the long tail are providing a disadvantage, or they're selected against. And then if long necks are superior to intermediate and short length necks, then, well, we're going to undergo directional selection. Okay, but think about these three different patterns here. Which of these patterns of selection would most likely result in a new species? Which one of these would result in the formation of a completely new species? Okay, think about this for a second. It'd be disruptive because it makes individuals in a population become more different from each other over time. Okay, the lazuli buntings, you're going to find more blue and more brown, and they're going to become more different from each other over time if that natural selection continues. Same with these clams over here. Okay, and this leads us into our next discussion of patterns of evolution here. What this is called when two populations become more different from each other over time, that's called divergent evolution, where two species that share a recent common ancestor become more different over time. Okay, so going back to these homologous structures, right? All of these organisms share a relatively recent common ancestor, right? Because they all have those same bones, but they became more different over time and they diverged. So that's called divergence evolution. Okay, the opposite of divergent evolution is called convergent evolution. All right, this doesn't tie back to our natural selection mechanisms as much, but convergent evolution is when species with less recent common ancestors become more similar because of living in similar environments. Okay, so here's our example at the beginning of the video. The ichthyosaur, the dolphin, and the shark, they're three, kind of distantly related species here. The shark is way older in terms of their lineage than the dolphin, and even a lot older than the ichthyosaur, which is a extinct reptile, right? But they all look very similar because they are all involved in similar environments, and that's what we call convergent evolution. Okay, and then our third pattern of evolution that we're talking about here is called coevolution. Co means together. If you're cooperating, you're working together. And coevolution is evolution where one species evolves as a result of the evolution of another. Okay, the perfect example of this are pollinators and flowers, right? They have evolved to adapt to each other over time through generations and generations. So insects with a better proboscis might be better adapted to getting nectar from a certain flower, and a certain flower might adapt to become more accommodating or less accommodating to certain types of bugs. Okay? Same thing with predator and prey, right? These mice population and the owl populations are evolving together. Certain owls are better at finding mice, and certain mice are better at escaping the owls. And as a result, natural selection occurs, and these two species evolve kind of together at the same time because of each other. And that's what we call coevolution. All right, so as we were just talking about before, they're not very closely related, but They're a result of convergent evolution, right? So there's 300 million years of evolution between these two species, but they look really similar because they evolved both in the ocean and they evolved um, similar niches in their ecosystem, right? They hunt for food, right? They do the same kind of things. All right, that is it for this video. Let me know if you have any questions, and we'll see you next time. Bye.